19 years after he first entered death row, Troy Davis's sentencing to death has been upheld in a Georgia court. The African-American inmate was convicted of murdering a white police officer back in 1989. But since his original trial, 7 of the 9 witnesses have recanted their testimony, and no physical evidence like DNA or fingerprints have ever linked Davis to the murder. The case has received international attention and has led many to believe that an innocent man will be put to death. Joining me to help discuss this is Thomas Ruffin Jr., Troy Davis's lawyer. So, Thomas, first of all, you've been one of his lawyers for a couple years now. I'm guessing that you've waited a long time for this decision. What was your original reaction when you heard that, he was going to be sentenced to death?
Well, first of all, 2 things. I'm one of many of his lawyers, and I certainly want to give Jason Ewart at Arnold and Porter credit for his work and his colleagues' work for doing the trial work on the case. Secondly, Troy, not to be picky, he's been sentenced to death since 1991, so he was always under the sentence of death. The question before the federal judge in Savannah, Georgia, Judge William Moore, was whether there was actual evidence of his innocence such that that sentence should be vacated.
And I'm guessing you think that there isn't enough evidence.
Oh, no. I think there was more than enough. I think the judge made a terrible mistake, but I must caution, I must qualify my statement in this vein, not without any confidence in what I said, but I still have to review the decision by the judge. It's about a 174-page decision, so we're looking at it. I have to look at it very closely.
And one of the things that the court said when it made its decision yesterday is that Mr. Davis didn't prove his innocence. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer. You're the expert, but I thought that in the United States of America, it was you were innocent until proven guilty, and the burden of proof was on the state to prove that someone's guilty, not the other way around. I mean, how does that make sense?
That's, first of all, the idea that the state has to prove a person's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt applies with the first trial. What happened was the first trial was so unfair, it was so full of prejudice, and the witnesses were so overborne by police pressure to lie against Mr. Davis, Troy Anthony Davis, that their lies rendered his trial unfair. The police pressure against them rendered their testimony not just suspect, but it should have been disqualified. And yet, that led to the guilty verdict and death sentence. So that was the time when Troy technically enjoyed this right to be protected with this innocence presumption. Since then, after his appeals, we go back to the courts and say, hey, all of you who dealt with this case, you've made mistakes, and we are, under the law, supposed to prove that mistake. So actually, I like the way you stated the law. Insofar as we come in with 7 of the government's 9 witnesses who say that Troy Davis didn't commit the crime. Those who say they saw it say they didn't see it, or those who say they saw the murder say, I was there, Troy was there, but he didn't kill the officer, Officer McPhail, but rather one of the 2 witnesses who didn't recant actually committed the murder. And then 5 other witnesses, actually more than 5 other witnesses, came forward and said, not only that, we saw the murder or heard the confession from the actual killer, and it was not Troy. Now, that, to me, is the sort of thing that the judge should say, yeah, I think Troy has met his burden, Mr. Davis has met his burden, or otherwise, I think the judge should say, look, this is such powerful evidence, and the question is whether we punish somebody for a crime he didn't do, and indeed punish the person to death such that I think the government must prove something here to make me maintain this verdict. But
yeah, and I think the fact that the punishment is death is what's getting so many people kind of up in arms here. What do you think that says about the United States justice system that, as you put it, that this trial, this original trial was so unfair? You said that, these witnesses were kind of put under police pressure. Is this something that happens all the time, or was this case unique? I mean, what does this say about a justice system that's supposed to have all these checks and balances and be fair?
Well, first of all, I'd say something like this does not happen all the time. Second of all, I think the decision by Judge Moore and all of the decisions prior to that ought to give us serious concern about what we call justice in the United States. I think what we must do is be vigilant in holding the judges, the prosecutors, defense lawyers like me, and the whole system under close scrutiny because, first of all, people make mistakes. And then in this matter, the judge's decision essentially says that whether there's a mistake or not, what's more important than whether people made a mistake is the process. Mm-hmm. And worshiping a process at the expense of a man's life, worshiping the process at the expense of proof of innocence that's discounted, is something that discredits the system to the degree I wonder what justice really is. Now, that's me.
Right.
Because
and you're not the only one, though, because let's talk about how much international attention and national attention this case has gotten. We have people like former President Jimmy Carter speaking about it, the Pope. We have Desmond Tutu. I believe we have a quote from him. He said, "It has been repeatedly demonstrated that our criminal justice system is not devoid of error, and we now know that 124 individuals have been released from death rows across the United States due to wrongful conviction. We must confront the unalterable fact that the system of capital punishment is fallible, given that it is administered by fallible human beings." I respectfully urge the Board of Pardons and Paroles to demonstrate your strong commitment to fairness and justice and commute the death sentence of Troy Anthony Davis. Now, what Archbishop Desmond Tutu said is very similar to what you were just telling me. Why do you think this case got so much international attention, that these kind of figures would speak about this?
Well, first of all, in the United States, we have this terrible problem with American bigotry, racist bigotry, class bigotry, within a system, not an accident, a system of white capital supremacy where we still have a large part of the population celebrating the idea that white people are superior to black people, or that when a black person is accused of a crime, such one as this, very ugly one, where a white police officer is killed, that race factor plays in. But then when the witnesses recant, and then when that becomes public, and yet the government in Georgia, statewide and locally, refuse to question that conviction but hold to it, notwithstanding the loss of credibility in it, that's when people start to say, is the U.S., is this racist bigotry still so prevalent that they would be embarrassed like this? And apparently it is. So one thing I want to bring to our attention, there was a long time ago, there was a case called Swain versus Alabama. This was back in the day when a black man was accused of raping a white woman. That was a capital offense. And not killing the white woman, not killing anybody. And a white man raping a black woman might not even be charged. But this was a bogus case where a lot of homeless people were on a train, and a bunch of black men were accused of raping two white women who later recanted. Yeah. But they fought up to the Supreme Court on 3 different occasions where the Supreme Court ruled in their favor 3 times before they finally, 3 times in their favor before they were finally freed. Right. And so one thing I want to say about Troy, he has said this over and over again. He expects what we call justice to come from the Creator, not by dying, but by our persistent fight for his liberation. Well, he certainly raised a lot of questions about the role of capital punishment, at least in this country. Thomas Ruffin, Jr., I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Thank you, ma'am.